Have you ever gone back to watch a favorite movie or show, something you know inside and out, and notice that something is different about it? I have a friend who watches HBO's The Pacific once a year. It's a gritty show about World War II, and it shows great reverence and attention to detail to historical events. There are these short documentaries that used to be shown before each episode, with narration by Tom Hanks, and featuring interviews with veterans who survived the war. Their stories are personal and harrowing, and apparently completely missing from streaming platforms like HBO Max and Netflix.
Where's the intro?
I guess we're calling it Max now. I'll get the memo eventually. Who knows why they're absent? Could it be because Tom Hanks has a blood pact with Apple? Thankfully, some kind souls uploaded them separately to YouTube. Whoever you are, you're doing the Lord's work. Most people either don't think or don't care about media preservation. I assume many think they can reliably watch something today and expect it to be intact the next time they take a trip down memory lane. But that's never guaranteed, especially now, as streaming services become the most common way Americans watch things. With physical media dying, it'll be harder to compare notes and discover changes. Now, it's not unheard of for edits to be made to a show or movie after it's released. Just ask George Lucas. I may never forgive him for what he did to the Wolfman in the Cantina, but now it seems we can't trust that something we watched 10 years ago will be the same without alterations. These platforms have shown they can, and will, make edits to their catalog for a variety of reasons. Content is being altered from its original form without audiences even realizing it, and I don't like it. I generally have the belief that once something is released to the public, it takes a life of its own, and shouldn't be updated without making the original available. If they host the content, then they can do whatever they want to it. They own it. And if we don't have our own copies, or even our own memories, to remember our past, well, here's a George Orwell quote for you. Who controls the past, controls the future. Who controls the present, controls the past. How worried should we be about our content being edited after we watch it? Let's think of this as a sliding scale. On the more benign and innocent side, we see edits being made because of licensing issues. This happens a lot with music rights for shows made before streaming was invented. Like Moonlighting, which finally was released on Hulu after years of locking down music licenses. Apparently they didn't imagine people watching stuff on the toilet when they were making these shows 20 years ago, because they didn't include digital rights in their contracts. This affected shows like Scrubs, where whole songs need to be changed for the streaming release.
If I had $1 million.
Next to that are updates made to shows, visuals, or effects. The creators of Stranger Things, the Duffer Brothers, say they've gone back and updated some of the visual effects after the show was released. Think of these like game patches, but I think they should have been done in time in the first place. It's bad enough that video games aren't finished upon release, but TV shows and movies too? That's annoying, and it can't be great to be one of the VFX workers working under those crunch conditions. There's those kinds of changes, and then there's outright censorship. Some of these edits are to make content more child-friendly, like censoring this pooping unicorn from Bluey.
You're so beautiful.
Won't somebody please think of the children?
To cutting this scene entirely from the Santa Claus.
1-800-SPANK-ME. I know that number.
Apparently, 1-800-SPANK-ME is a real hotline, and kids from across the country were calling it and raking up hundreds of dollars in phone bills. Disney was reluctant at first to change anything in the movie. They even made an attempt to buy the hotline itself to disconnect it. The pressure was too great, and Disney eventually removed the joke from all future releases. I didn't know this scene was cut from the Blu-ray version when I bought it, so you know where it's going now? Some of these cuts feel like the kind of edits we would see on broadcast television or cable. Remember that? Let me know in the comment section if you remember any obvious edits made to a TV show or movie to make them fit for broadcast. I'm sure there's a lot I've never heard of. Then there are edits made without public explanation. Earlier this year, The French Connection was released on the Criterion streaming channel. The version they were showing had a 9-second scene cut out of the film featuring a loose cannon cop saying he doesn't trust anybody, and included a racial slur. I guess this is something we could plausibly see on a linear TV network, but this is the Criterion channel, a network that advertises, quote, its pioneering commitment to presenting each film as its maker would want it seen. It's anyone's guess behind the motives for cutting this, or who even made the decision. And it was reportedly just American audiences who saw this version. International audiences saw the uncut version that won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. I started a free trial with Criterion to see it myself, and it doesn't appear to be on their site anymore. Max has it in its full racist glory, so I guess that's a win for preservation. For now. This feels like a problem that could have been solved with the Warner Brothers approach to controversial subject matter. Just put a title card at the beginning of the show, explaining that these films were a product of their time. That's what they did with the DVD release of some of the old-timey Looney Tunes cartoons. Disney owns The French Connection now, so some are speculating they had something to do with the scene being cut. And I'm not trying to say that Disney is the only company censoring things, but there are a lot of examples coming out of the House of Mouse. Or rather, not coming out, because they're being censored. I'm generally not a conspiratorial person, but instances like these make it hard for me to dismiss the paranoia I see online. And even with our physical copies, there's no guarantee we're getting exactly what we originally saw in theaters. Especially when some filmmakers use the new changes as a selling point and tells the world up front they're doing it to satisfy their artistic vision. What happens when a filmmaker is dead set on making the original version of their film disappear from the public consciousness? This is probably not the Star Wars you're used to watching. This is how audiences were introduced to it for the first time in 1977, before it was even titled Episode 4 A New Hope. It was a technical marvel. Even the opening crawl needed a good amount of engineering to look right, not to mention all the other practical effects audiences in the 70s had never seen before. The original film was rewarded with 6 Academy Awards, including Oscars for Best Editing and Visual Effects. But for its creator, George Lucas, it was never good enough. He is one of those creatives who believes art is never finished, only abandoned.
The film is never finished, they just finally take it away from you at some point.
Thanks, George. Hey, if you could go back and do Star Wars again, what would you do different?
For an entire generation, people have experienced Star Wars the only way it's been possible, on the TV screen. But if you've only seen it this way, you haven't seen it at all.
He would revisit the first Star Wars trilogy and re-release new versions of them called Special Editions, which featured new footage with state-of-the-art special effects to replace the ones audiences originally fell in love with. Lucas spent millions remastering these films, and says these new versions are closer to the vision he originally had, but couldn't achieve because of the limitations of his era and the compromises he had to make to get it complete in the first place. And you know what? Good for him. I'm glad he was able to realize his vision, and I'm sure he made a gazillion more dollars re-releasing these films. But, and I may just be splitting hairs here, but these are not the same films, and they wouldn't be an issue if the original theatrical editions were widely available. But they're not. Lucas made sure to do his best to leave them behind in the dustbin of history.
What a piece of junk!
In a 2004 interview, while promoting the DVD release of the special editions, Lucas said, "The special edition, that's the one I wanted out there. The other movie, it's on VHS, if anybody wants it. I'm not going to spend, we're talking millions of dollars here, the money and the time to refurbish that. Because to me, it doesn't really exist anymore. It's like this is the movie I wanted it to be, and I'm sorry you saw a half-completed film and fell in love with it. But I want it to be the way I want it to be." My entryway into the original trilogy was with these 2004 DVDs. The bonus material disc in particular is what inspired me to learn more about filmmaking. Shout out to Empire of Dreams. But I would like the original prints to be made available just for the sake of history. I can imagine generations from now, people watching the special editions and tying them back to the 70s and 80s, the era in which they were made, and wondering, why doesn't everything else from this era look like this? Without the reference point of what was available at the time, we can't appreciate the jumps in technology made from then to now. The visual effects were groundbreaking achievements for their time. They made a computer-controlled camera specifically for the Death Star battle, painstakingly staging models and rigging them with explosives. A lot of these shots were replaced with CGI enhancements, and it feels like a betrayal to the work the effects teams put in this. Remember that Oscar they got for visual effects? Well, we can't see it anymore, at least not through official channels. This is not the version of the movie that won the Best Visual Effects Oscar. Some of the new scenes make the movie longer, which gets in the way of the snappy editing that was a hallmark of the original. During production, Lucas would often tell his actors to redo takes, but have them do it faster and more intense.
Faster and more intense.
Faster, more intensity.
He must have forgotten about that when he added Jabba the Hutt back into the film. This scene wasn't needed. The wolf guy from the cantina had a really cool mask, and now it's this smoking lizard thing wearing a scarf. That's not as cool, man. And the most infamous example, and I'm sure you've seen this coming because I talked about it in my last video, the changes made to the scene where Han shoots Greedo. In the original cut, we don't even see Greedo take a shot. He was talking, and then Han shot him from under the table. It was a real gangster move. Lucas, however, insists that Han always shot second in self-defense, because he didn't want him to be a, quote, cold-blooded killer. The special editions gave him a chance to insert this wide shot of Han stretching his neck fast enough to dodge a laser blast. Okay, George, you sneaky little troll, I see you. This is controversial in nerddom, because Han shooting first gives him outlaw street cred. It's characterization expressed not with words, but in action. I think that Han was fine shooting Greedo first anyway. I mean, come on. Greedo was pointing a gun at him throughout the entire exchange.
Stay on target.
Getting back on topic. We probably won't be having this conversation in another 100 years, because we'll all be dead, and no one alive will remember how these films were originally introduced to the public, and I think that's a shame. Is there anything that third parties can do about media preservation, seeing as how we can't trust the studios and the corporations to preserve stuff on their own? Most of you are probably in the comments saying, piracy is the answer, and I'll partially agree, but only because the official channels make it too difficult to access the original materials. Looking back at Star Wars, the Special Edition has been the official version released on physical and digital platforms for most of the last 20 years. The last time the originals were released was in 2006, and it was a very sloppy DVD transfer that's full of issues.
This dated master was non-anamorphic, which meant that it was not enhanced for modern widescreen televisions, and it was also plagued by many other issues, such as motion smearing caused by a primitive digital noise removal method used when making the transfer in the early 1990s.
In response, a dedicated community of fans and film preservationists have made it their mission to make the despecialized edition to recapture the look and sound of the originals. They, like me, believe films and how they're introduced to the culture are important. This version was released by Peter Harmey. He cobbled together DVDs, a 35mm print, and still images and matte paintings to make a Frankenstein's monster of a movie. The footage of non-special edition Star Wars you've seen throughout this video is from Harmey's despecialized edition. 4K 77 is the 4K fan edit, and I hear it's pretty good. I just don't have a 4K display to enjoy it on. But the legality of fan edits is dubious at best. This seems like flagrant copyright infringement. Releasing an unauthorized version of a movie that the artist clearly doesn't want to exist. But on the other hand, preservation is a moral goal, and making custom versions of your own property is fair use. Let's stick a big "I'm not a lawyer" disclaimer here though. I don't want anybody going to jail because they downloaded a despecialized edition. Those involved with these despecialized versions don't sell their fan edits, and advocate that anyone wishing to acquire these copies should buy the official release. The ideal situation would look like the Blade Runner 30th Anniversary physical release. There are 4 different versions of the movie here, including the original cut, an international cut, a director's cut, and the final cut, all in one package. Instead, Star Wars fans get Darth Vader yelling no on Blu-ray. No! Disney bought Star Wars from George Lucas in 2012. So unless there was a clause in that contract forbidding Disney from doing anything with the original releases, I am asking them, please shut up and take my money. Release the original Star Wars in 4K. I ultimately don't think we'll ever see the end of studios and creators meddling with their stuff after it's released. It's as inevitable as your streaming bills going up, or me having caffeine withdrawals when I go too long without Diet Pepsi. There's a tension sometimes with mass media between art and commerce. The parts that resonate with us, the parts that stick with us, sometimes come into conflict with the cold hard business realities of selling as much product to as many people as possible. Except for Star Wars. If ever there was a license to print money, it would be remastering the original versions. But for all other cases, the most we can do is pay attention and let each other know if we spot something weird, so we can at least have a collective memory of what we're missing. Now I turn it over to you. What do you think about media preservation? Are we worrying too much about TV? Should I go and touch grass? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.